It's always about size when I come up here. You know, you got a bigger governor, you got a bigger state.
I wasn't going to go there, Rick.
Oh, you were too. I'm just getting it out of the way.
I'm only 2.5 times the size of you. I mean, Alaska's only 2.5 times the size of Texas.
And you're about 2.5 times the size of me.
Well, it's great to have both of these great governors from oil-producing states here with us today, and obviously you've already addressed the first question that I had on the list about, teeny little sister that we have in Texas. You cut Alaska in half, and you become the third largest state. But seriously, can you talk about the things that you did as governor to incentivize folks to come to invest in the state of Texas? What kind of things did you do, and how did you help drive that economic boom in Texas?
35 years ago, if you had been listening in on corporate boardrooms and you did not hear the word Texas, it just wasn't a place where people thought about relocating, growing a business. This was Texas. We had an oil and gas industry, and we had farming and ranching, and that was kind of it. But in the early 2000s, and this is kind of a little bit just a touch partisan here, Texas was a Democrat state. As a matter of fact, the first 3 times I was elected to the state house was as a Democrat. I never met a Republican until I was like 27 years old, or anybody that would admit to be one, let me put it that way. And so, fast forward up through the 80s, Ronald Reagan made it okay for people like me, conservatives, to be a Republican, and you started seeing this transition in the state of Texas, and George W. Bush got elected governor in '94, and you fast forward, he had still a Democrat House, Democrat Senate, Democrat Lieutenant Governor. By the early 2000s, when I became governor in 2003, interestingly, the first time we had all Republican leadership, Republican Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, all the statewide elections. And that year was when we started making some real changes in the business climate in the state of Texas, passed the most sweeping tort reform in the nation, which basically sent the message, hey, you can come to the state of Texas, risk your capital, and you're not going to get sued frivolously. We also did something else, and this, I think, gets right to the core of actually why I came up here, Governor. You get this, but for the reporters and those that are going to be sharing what we talk about to the people of Alaska, you get more of what you incentivize. You get less of what you tax. and so the message here is very clear. We became the #1 place in America to do business in about the mid-2000s because we put tax policy into place. This governing is really pretty simple. Don't overtax, don't overregulate, don't overlitigate, and have a skilled workforce, which translates into accountable public schools. Those are the 4 things. If you'll get that right, people will move to your state, and your state will prosper. That's what we basically did in a encapsulated form. But if you want to see this state incredibly explode, Governor and I talked at length about building the pipeline from up on the North Slope down to Cook's Inlet fractionating facility and selling that LNG around the world. That's his vision. That's what we have at stake here. You really want to change the world. Alaska can be at the epicenter of that, and people will move here. People will be having great jobs. A lady in the corner, as I wrap up here, who was working in this building, and she made the comment to me that she worked in Prudhoe Bay. And if it wasn't for the oil and gas industry, she wouldn't have been able to take care of her family. That's a powerful message that you have in this state, and one that its tentacles can and should go way outside of this grand state to make a difference in the future of the world.
Yeah, thanks, Governor. So Governor Dunleavy, this isn't about Alaska versus Texas, but you've been actively trying to encourage folks to invest in the state with a lot of what Governor Perry just talked about. Can you talk about who you've been talking to, what kind of message and response you've been getting, and what is the message you've been delivering?
Yeah, great question. So, well, first, I want to thank Rick for being here. We've started a relationship probably about 2 years ago, have these conversations, but in some ways he's underselling himself. I mean, he'd have to spend a whole day here to explain all the things that he's done, but long story short, he's one of my heroes because he was on a mission. You know, 4-term governor, but everything he did was about getting something done, moving Texas forward. And that's the thing that we're trying to do here in Alaska, is move Alaska forward by staying on a mission. What's the mission? More oil and gas, monetize our forests, monetize our location on the globe, monetize our mining possibilities. Like Texas, you know, we're an all-in state. Everything for opportunities, what Texas or Alaska should be all about. I think we have one of the greatest mottos in the country for a state, north of the future. And it kind of encapsulates it. We have some headwinds. We're different than Texas, right? Texas came in as a republic. Very little federal land. In Texas, if you're a landowner, you own the mineral rights. It's a different story here, as we know. So it's a little bit different. But nonetheless, the opportunities that present itself are very similar if we capitalize on them. And so what Texas did with the resources they had under Rick and others is they put into play policies that worked. Alaska, we have the resources as well, and we just have to put into play the policies. We have a little resistance and a little issue, obviously, with the federal government. We have 54 actions against us by the Biden administration, which is problematic. But nonetheless, we just have to make sure internally in Alaska that we can all agree that opportunities float all the boats. And so that's what we're all about. We have tremendous conventional oil reserves going well into the future. And given what's happening across the world in terms of less investments in some oil plays, and the Biden administration's focus on socially engineering what energy is going to look like, from not having stoves to not having gas dryers, et cetera, I think bodes well, to be honest with you, for the Texas and the Alaskans. Because as other outfits like New York prevent pipelines from going across their state lines to be able to deliver cheaper fuel to their people, I think we stand to gain from that. And so as long as we keep our doors open for business, and as long as we keep the policies that we've had, and we do have some battles with the feds, but nonetheless, I think I really do. I think Alaska's best days are ahead of us.
Amen. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Governor. And I will say that obviously both Texas and Alaska have really helped as we strived to decrease our dependence on foreign countries. The amount of production from big oil states like Texas and Alaska really helped bring that energy security to our nation. So right now, though, as we go forward, what do you perceive as the biggest obstacle for Alaska for increasing oil and gas development in the state, and what can be done to fix that?
Yeah. The lady in the corner that was visiting with me, she gets it. She understands that if you overtax something, you're going to have less of it. I mean, this is really pretty simple stuff. And the message that the public needs to understand, although, you know, they may see, you know, Hillcorp, or they may see ConocoPhillips, and they go, oh, those are just a bunch of rich oil and gas companies. And you know, thank God that they're here and willing to risk their capital. But the average citizen out there, and this is where I think, you know, the governor is so good about being able to lay out his vision and explain to the people why. If you go kill that goose that's laying the golden egg, so to speak, let's go put this tax on them because they're making a lot of money, right? At $83, I think is what Brent crude was this morning. They're making a lot of money. So, you know, we can put a 10% tax on them, and we can use that for, name it out there, whatever, you know, everybody's got their own little special interest thing. Go spend it on that. But you do that, and I know Jeff Hildebrand. And there's a point in time where Jeff Hildebrand goes, you know what? I'll just stay down here in Texas. They're not going to overtax me. They're not going to overregulate me. They're not going to overlitigate me. And at that particular point in time, this extraordinary great future that we talked about for Alaska, it goes away. So be thoughtful about how you tax, how you regulate, how you litigate this industry. You know, I get it, government has a role, they need to pay for schools and those things, but be wise in how you deal with that. And that's, to me, yes, the federal government is a problem. I mean, holy mackerel, we had COVID and we saw them trying to control us with all of their COVID regulations, right? And we kind of managed through that. We got the whole climate change thing out there. Don't get confused. John Kerry doesn't care about the climate. John Kerry wants to control you. And all of those people in that climate want to, and we'll be able to manage that. But let me tell you something. They're talking about telling us how many beers we can have a day. No way, man. That's where we're drawing the line. Right, Alaska? You're not stopping us from just having 2 beers.
Maybe we should just end it at that. Now, Governor Dunleavy obviously has had a message of being open for business, and so not just tax policy, but regulation policy is important as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we saw here what happened with Willow, right? We were on the edge of our seats, we were crossing our fingers, we were hoping, not because we were hoping that the resource was there, it was proven that it's there. We were hoping that a decision out of Washington once again wouldn't hammer Alaska. And that's, it's a little different. Again, Texas has a lot of private land. We don't necessarily, and we have to deal with the federal government. But if we can do everything we can to ensure that those man-made hurdles, whether they be bad tax policy, whether they be regulatory issues, whether they be the EIS issues coming out of Washington, if we can somehow deal with those, the resources here, the resources all throughout this country, the resources in Pennsylvania, it's in Texas, it's in Louisiana, it's here in Alaska, New Mexico. If we can just be allowed to unleash it under the last administration, that was happening. We became an energy giant, more so than any other place on the planet, the United States of America. And I remember, and I'm sure Rick does too, I remember sitting in a car with my parents to stay in line during the Arab oil embargoes, which really was the impetus for the North Sea and the North Slope, as well as the Cold War, to make that happen. And so we've got the conventional resource here in Alaska. We have the infrastructure here in Alaska. We have the know-how here in Alaska. We just got to make sure that policies, both here and in D.C., to the best of our ability, are such that we can continue to produce cheap energy for this country and this world.
So, governors, the demand for oil is not decreasing. Their forecasts are that for the next 3 to 4 decades, we're going to see at least stable demand out there. But both of you have proven that you care about an all-of-the-above energy policy. And so, Governor Perry, I know there is no state in the union that has more wind energy than the state of Texas. And obviously, Governor Dunleavy, you've been very focusing on microreactors and trying to get other energy forms in the state. So can you talk about how your states obviously want to be leaders in not just the conventional oil and gas, but in other energy?
Well, again, we are lucky because we have the former Secretary of Energy here. And we had discussions about nukes, micronuclears, and Rick could talk about that, but it's not an either or. We were the leading producer of oil in this country in the 80s and 90s. There's no doubt about it. And we can produce, I think, hundreds of thousands of barrels more. I mean, it's not unrealistic to think we could be producing 700, 800,000 barrels if we're allowed to do so. But at the same time, technologies have unleashed other methods to produce energy. Texas is a leader in wind by far. Texas is also a leader in solar. Texas is a leader in oil and gas. Alaska could be a leader in wind. Alaska could be a leader in micro nukes. We passed the bill last year to get ahead of things so we can site micro nukes when that technology is ready, and we're working with nuclear companies for that. That's going to open up all possibilities, for example, for mining, remote mining, powering our remote communities. But this idea that we should somehow end one form of energy and in order to make another form of energy cheaper, it's not just anti-American, but it's really going to hurt the poorest of the poor, and we've said that so often. And so we're an all-in state. I know Texas is an all-in state. Rick could talk about that, but fossil fuels are going to be with us for a very long time, and I'd rather produce them here in America than produce them overseas where the regulations are not as good as here in America, where the jobs can stay here in America, where the wealth can stay here in America, and quite frankly, your national security is going to be enhanced by doing this in America. And so between Texas, Alaska, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, you name it, we've got the energy to be self-sufficient, and we have the energy to export to our allies, whether they're in Asia with our gas line, or whether in Europe with gas coming out of the Gulf Coast or even hopefully someday Pennsylvania.
So I'm gonna give you some data, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong when I get fact checks on it. Today, fossil fuels account for 78% of the total U.S. consumption. By 2050, they will still account for 74%. So this idea that, the John Kerrys of the world that are running around, flying on their private jets here and there, and Greta Thunberg who gets up and says, we got to, stop fossil fuel usage, leave it in the ground. They're just wrong. They're just flat wrong. The renewable energy over this period of time, which we talked about from now until 2050, will grow from 10%, which it is today, to 16%. Renewables just are not ready to have a meaningful place in the energy production. We saw it in the state of Texas in February of 2021. And at the end of this year, in my home state, this great oil and gas state, and I was one of the promoters of wind energy, and our solars come on, and I will tell you, because of the federal subsidies, we've gotten out of balance, and we've gotten out of balance in a substantial way. That's what happened in Texas in 2021 when that cold snap came through there, and wind energy failed and solar energy failed. And by the end of this year, because of those federal subsidies, and I think us just taking our eye a little bit off the ball in the state of Texas, 46% of our dispatchable energy, Governor, is going to be renewable. That is not a good mix. So, all the above, it's good, wind's good, solar's good, but they are niche energy producers. You got to have the base load. Fossil fuels, particularly clean burning American natural gas, which you all have an extraordinary abundance of, and these small modular reactors. One of the things the governor and I and all of you need to do collectively is to educate the public that these technologies are safe. Yeah, we had 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl, we had Fukushima. Those are old technologies. That's not what SMRs and micros are. They're walk-away safe. American technology and innovation is what will carry the way here. And that will be funded by the profits that we see from the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get to the new green economy. You can't get to a lot of these technologies that really are, I think, proving themselves up. You can't do that without an investment from fossil fuels into that. You simply can't do it. And so that's the discussion I've had with people that want us to expedite the end of fossil fuels. I said, the civilization, we're here today in 2023 as a result of fossil fuels. We're not here today because of windmills. We're not here today because of some other type of technology. It was fossil fuels. But as Rick said, you're not going to get to where you want to go unless you invest the profits and what we're doing in oil and gas into some of these new technologies. And just a quick note on the nukes, and like I said, he and I have had conversations on this. It's actually safe. Nobody died in 3 Mile Island. Nobody died in Fukushima. There were folks that died at Chernobyl because they were first responders running to try and put that thing out after it went super critical. But the technology, nuclear technology, is probably one of the safest methods of generating electricity and power and heat in the entire world. And so it doesn't have to be an either or. Alaska can be a nuke state, oil and gas state. There could be wind here. There's solar here now. But again, I think what Rick and I are saying is there's no reason to choose something over fossil fuels. Fossil fuels will always be, as he said, the base for everything we do going well into the future. I've got to run here in about 25 minutes to a show out of New York because there's discussions now. I don't know if you heard this. Some people are thinking this oil may go to $200 a barrel here over the next several months because of some economic issues happening worldwide.
Just kidding.
So
83 is fine.
More production. We want more production, not necessarily extreme high prices.
Secretary, I'd be happy with $200 a barrel.
Well, and frankly, where it is right now is fine. I want to leave you with this, because this is really important, and it gets lost in all of the debate about the climate and what have you. And we've driven down emissions in the United States more than any other country in the world. What we've done, and it was because we went from coal plants to clean burning natural gas. And we can do that for the world. Alaskan North Slope natural gas transported out of Cook's Inlet to all over the world, replacing those coal plants in China, replacing those coal plants in India. If you really care about the climate, I mean, if you truly are concerned about the climate, then reducing the emissions is the way to do it. And the only way that the emissions are going to be reduced in the world that we live in today, globally, is by offsetting those coal plants with clean burning natural gas. That's what's out there. And here's the rest of the story. And this is why the environmentalists will, at the end of the day, lose this debate, because they basically are saying, therefore, eugenics. Now that's kind of a cold statement, but it's true. You're telling literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of people in China and in particularly Africa, in those countries that don't have one electron of power, that you're never going to have it. We're going to live our luxurious life over here in the West, and we're going to, do all the things and have air conditioning and have sonograms and incubators and all of the things that power brings, but you're not. You don't deserve it. You're not worthy enough of it. What a dark-hearted message to the rest of the world from those on the left, these radical environmentalists that are literally looking into the camera and admitting you're just going to die. You're just going to live a horrid life. You're going to heat your home with wood until it's gone, and then cow dung, and you're going to suck all of that particulate matter up in your lungs, and you're just going to live a really bad life. But you know what? That's just, sorry you weren't born in the UK or United States. What a horrid story. I mean, I don't understand why. Well, I understand why. It's this whole control thing. But we've got to do a better job of standing up and defending people around the world that they deserve a better life. That better life will come from base load power, either fossil fuels or these small modular reactors. And we ought to be proud of that and stand up and go forward with great pride that we're a part of making the world better, because we've promoted the industry of fossil fuels as such in the great state of Alaska.
Yeah, speaking of doing it better, Governor Dunleavy has been out there talking about the Alaska standard and how no one does it better. We've been injecting methane and not flaring and venting it in Alaska for better part of four decades. I mean, we do it right here. We cared about greenhouse gases before caring about greenhouse gases was cool. So, Governor, do you want to talk a little bit about the Alaska standard and the message you've been getting out there?
Well, again, it's just it's a difference in our histories between our two great states. We had to collectivize all of our resources under the sovereign. That was one issue. Our permanent fund helps distribute some of the wealth. We're over $80 billion, probably the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the entire world if you base it on a per capita view. But we don't flare our gas as a matter of procedure or habit. We don't have very many leaks in our pipeline compared to other places like the former Soviet Union, Russia today. We really make sure, if you go to the North Slope, I mean, I'm talking to most of the folks here who have been up there, you know what the environmental regulations are up there, and we take it very, very seriously. We do, our fellow Alaska Natives do, our partners do, very seriously. So again, that's when I'm talking to folks that are talking about shutting down Alaska, I say to them, where are you gonna go? You're gonna still want oil, you're gonna still need minerals. Where are you gonna go? You're gonna go to the former Soviet Union, Russia? You're gonna go to South America? You're gonna go to Central Africa? I mean, if you really care about the environment, you wanna do it here in the United States of America. You wanna do it here, you wanna do it in Texas, you wanna do it in Alaska, because you're gonna take care of the environment. So when we were in a investor conference in Europe back in June, and that was the discussion. These were investors from all over the world, and we did hand them out our Alaska standard. And quite frankly, they were surprised, very surprised, that we have the environmental standards that we do. And so again, if we're allowed to just do what we do by the federal government, if we're allowed to produce oil and gas here in Alaska, we'll do it better than anywhere else, and we'll produce oil and gas that will lower the cost of energy for all people. You know, one of the things that we talk about all the time, and Jason, you may have been part of those conversations, is I always say to my staff, we've got to make sure that whatever we do, we keep individuals in mind, like the single mom with 3 kids. Is she going to be able to afford to heat her house? Is she going to be able to afford to drive to work? Is she going to be able to afford to buy a house? Period. We've got to look at that. And if you're going to artificially eliminate one source of energy and the cost of that new energy goes up, at least in the beginning, I don't know how it serves people well. And so again, the idea here is to do it well. You do it in America. I think we do it better than anywhere else in the country, in the world, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, Governor. And I would say even with that incredible environmental ethic that we have here in Alaska, constantly projects are subjected to litigation from outside NGOs who are trying to save Alaska from themselves. So, you know, be it a pipeline or drilling a new well, you name it. We saw what happened with Willow. Alaska and Texas, the United States in general, have rigorous environmental standards. What do you think is the solution for this unnecessary and incessant litigation that is really stopping this kind of responsible development from happening?
Well, there's this, I mean, you know, we just had the Sackett case. If you're familiar with the Sackett case, that was on wetlands. That was decided by the Supreme Court. The Sackett case really defined what wetlands are. It's not every single puddle there is on the planet, especially here in Alaska, where we have 65% of the nation's wetlands. That's going to help with, I think, some more responsible development. It's unfortunate. Once again, it's a little different in Texas, and Rick can talk about that. But up here in Alaska, we are somewhat beholden to the federal government, especially when we go into federal lands like NPRA. You know, as a matter of fact, it's interesting. NPRA was established 100 years ago by Warren Harding, 1923 in February. I think it was 23rd of 1923. And if you read the history on that, you would think it was made by a totally different world compared to what Washington is dealing with today. But the long story short is, we've got to come up with a way to shorten the permitting process. We have to come up with a way that they can't get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bites at the apple, because really what it is just to slow down the actual bringing online of these projects. And it's really a detriment to everyone. And so, filing a 10th Amendment case to make sure that some of these agencies, stay within their lane and don't overstretch or overreach what the real purpose of that agency is. We're in 54 different fights with the federal government over some of these actions that they've taken against Alaska. We've asked for more funding from our legislature, which they've given us, thank goodness, to be able to fight back on this stuff. But we've got to come up with reform permitting processes. We got to come up with a whole reform of this whole litigation approach, because if not, we're going to just seize up as a country. We can't even get green projects permitted out of these same agencies, let alone oil and gas, because of all of the red tape and folks that want to shut everything down. You have environmentalists that may not like carbon, but they'll fight with other environmentalists over a hydro project. You have environmentalists that may not like nukes, even though it's carbon-free, and they'll fight with folks over nukes, vice versa, wind versus viewshed folks, I mean, you name it. So it's becoming a mess. It's impacted oil and gas for some time, but I think what you're going to see is it's seizing everything up.
Short answer to that is loser pay. Those of you who understand the concept of loser pay in the courthouse, we have totally different states from the standpoint of the federal government has such a overreaching impact on this state's natural resources. We don't have that in the state of Texas. One of the reasons we passed the most sweeping tort reform in the nation in 2003, and it had huge impact on our state to stop frivolous lawsuits. And the single at the state level, I wish they'd do it at the federal level too, but if you want to see a real halt to frivolous lawsuits, pass loser pay. So if they sue you and lose, they get to pay your court cost. That stops the nonsense.
Thank you. So next question we have up is, with this evolving energy landscape, what role do taxes and regulations play in securing energy independence for our country and sustain state economies in energy-producing states like Alaska and Texas? And I know you addressed some of the tax perspective, but
we've already touched that one. You get more of what you incentivize.
Governor?
Yeah, and in addition to what Rick said, you have to have certainty going forward. You have to have stability going forward. And in a chaotic world that we've had the last 3 years and probably will for the next several years, that's going to be absolutely essential if we can chart a course with making sure that the permitting processes and tax policies are stable. It's going to help us produce more and keep prices stable as well.
And in the regulatory world, it's probably even more important, Governor, as you know. If people are planning a substantial investment in your state, and then you come in and change the rules in the middle of the game, they're kind of like, well, wait a minute, we're going to go somewhere where there's more stability.
So we have time for a few questions from the audience. I've seen a couple of them come in. One of them was focusing on education campaigns. What is it that Alaska and Texas should be doing to help grow grassroots understanding, better educate your populace as well as America about how we're doing it right to try to incentivize and encourage more of that development to occur in the United States?
Well, I think obviously in the vast majority of the young people in this state are going to be educated in your public school system. So you have to have, and again, I'm a little bit out of my water here. I don't know exactly how y'all govern your public schools. Is it by school boards and what have you? And do you elect them? If you do, that's kind of like what we do in Texas. So you got to have school board members that think right, if you will, that aren't in there trying to teach a radical environmental education that is not the truth. And having a governor, Mike gets it. He truly understands what the oil and gas industry and its positive impact, not only on the environment per se, but the economic environment as well. So day in and day out, and Kara, I don't know whether AOGA has an education arm that goes out and helps educate and what have you. I suspect they do. But it's really important for us to battle the misinformation that goes on. And let me just, there is a young man who I think is one of the best spokespersons for the fossil fuel industry in the world. His name is Alex Epstein. Mm-hmm. Alex wrote a book called Fossil Future, wrote one before that called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, that I highly recommend. Get it into every one of your libraries, get your young people to read it. He's a maybe 30-something-year-old, the millennials. And the millennials are who I think are going to be the most important that we educate about this, that don't buy into the nonsense that we got an existential threat on our hands here. Understand that this is a small group of people in government who want to control you.
So I'm gonna do my part by saying, and I'm sincere when I say this, when I was senator, I would watch Rick Perry's videos on highlighting Texas as a place to go and do business. And if you get a chance, go on YouTube. There's some of the best videos there are, selling your state. One of the things I found out when I became governor, this is interesting, is I'd look out my windows, and you'll hear me say this, my staff just rolls their eyes all the time. We don't have a lot of cranes operating in the state of Alaska. You go to every other state in the country, as soon as you land in Seattle, there's cranes everywhere. There's cranes in Nashville. There's cranes all over the place in Texas. There's cranes in California. There's no cranes here, which means, is there activity here? So one of the things that we had assumed for a long time is that other places, other investors, other outfits knew about Alaska. And what we found when we started to talk about investors the past 2 years, they don't. So when we went to Europe and explained how we do oil and gas in Alaska, how we do mining, what our environmental regulations were, they were quite frankly, and I'm not exaggerating, they were surprised. They thought we were a backwater. They thought at the end of Prudhoe Bay, the pipeline, Alaska was finished. So that's why they went and they looked in other places. So the whole idea of educating investors, educating the public on what Alaska does and what Alaska does well is incredibly important. We have a thing called ARE, which is Alaska Resource Education. The administration put a bunch of money into that last year. Some of that was cut back, but nonetheless, we're going to put more money into it because I'll say this. As an educator, 10 years ago, I was invited to a student group in which they asked me, as a senator, a bunch of questions. You know, how are we going to put more oil in the pipeline, Governor? How are we going to create more jobs in Alaska? How are we going to do this? Today, last year, I was asked to answer questions from a group of students. The questions have radically changed. What are you going to do to protect the environment, Governor? What are you going to do to include marginalized individuals and groups in your administration? What are you going to do? All the questions had nothing to do with economics, jobs, a future based upon resources. And so we're kind of losing the battle in really putting a perspective into what these resources do. There was a video the other day, right? I think some of you saw it. Nevada Rangers on the Paiute Tribal Reservation were called up to take out of the way that they were blocking the road some protesters. That mentality is gaining traction among our young people. But those protesters got there driving pickup trucks that use diesel fuel to park there to rail against using diesel fuel and oil and gas. And so we've got to interject a little bit of sanity, a little bit of balance in all of this. I'm a big proponent of solar panels. I'm probably going to get some solar panels because of where I live. But I also understand where the solar panels come from. They come from China, and they're produced with cheap electricity, and those electrical plants are powered by what? Coal. So we just have to make sure that everyone understands what's really happening, where things are coming from, and we have to educate our students. And so you'll see another push by us during the budget season to add more money into educating students on what resources really, really do for this state, for this country.
Governor Dunleavy, Governor Perry, thank you both for your leadership. Governor Perry, you look like you want to have a last word. So I'm going to give you.
I want the last word here. And, you know, tomorrow is the 1st of September. There's a lot of things. You think about the 1st of September, the fiscal year starts, Labor Day is here. There's just a lot. I mean, duck season starts right here in Alaska. But it's also a very, very important day for a person here in the audience, and that is the leader of the Alaska Oil and Gas Association, and it's Kara Moriarty's 25th birthday. So will you all join me in singing happy birthday to this young lady? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kara. Happy birthday to you. Love you, girl.
And many more. And I'd be remiss, Governor Perry, if I didn't give my old boss and the head of a state twice as big as yours the last word, the last word.
Well, sometimes good things come in small packages. Rick knows that. But our states, although we're different in some ways, we really have the same goals, and that's to provide opportunity for all of our people. Texas has demonstrated how to get it done. Alaska, I believe Alaska's, the next 50 years for Alaska, starting now. This is going to be Alaska's era. With our location on the globe, with our energy resources, with the shifting geopolitics, whether it's going to be a future with more renewables, it'll be Alaska mining. Whether it's going to be cheap housing and how we can help that, it's going to be Alaska's forests. Whether it's heating our homes and powering our airplanes, it's going to be Alaska's oil and gas. And so we were once the leader in the 80s and 90s, 2 million barrels a day. We may not get to 2 million barrels, but certainly if we're allowed to, when we do this right, we're going to see a lot more oil in the pipeline. We're going to see more jobs, cheaper energy for everybody, And Alaska is going to have its place amongst the resource-producing nations of the world, and a place I think that is going to lead on that. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Rick for coming up, and he wants to go. He's got somebody he's going to go duck hunting with, and we wish you nothing but the best.